My father, Richard Cole, was the black sheep of the Harrington family before I was even born. I didn't know that for most of my childhood. To me, he was just Dad, the man who taught me how to change a tire, who showed up to every parent-teacher conference in his mechanic's uniform with grease under his fingernails, who read me bedtime stories in a voice so gentle it made the monsters under my bed feel sorry for them. He was the poorest man on our block, but to me, he was a king. It wasn't until I was 12 years old that I learned the truth. I came home from school one afternoon and found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a letter with a look I'd never seen on his face. His hands were shaking. "Dad, what's wrong?" He looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw something break behind his eyes. Then he folded the letter, tucked it into his shirt pocket, and smiled that smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Nothing, kiddo, just old ghosts." The letter was from his father, my grandfather, Arthur Harrington III. I didn't know I had a grandfather until that day. The story came out in pieces over the years, little fragments my father would drop when he was tired or nostalgic, or when the weight of the world pressed down too hard for him to carry alone. Arthur Harrington III was a titan. Old Boston money, a family fortune built on shipping lanes and railroad stocks, polished into a multi-billion-dollar empire by men in three-piece suits who never got their hands dirty. The Harringtons didn't work for a living. They inherited. They invested. They attended galas where champagne cost more than our rent. My father was the youngest of 3 children, the spare, not the heir. His older brother William was being groomed to take over the empire. His older sister Margaret was being groomed to marry into another empire. And Richard was the disappointment. He didn't want the boardroom. He didn't want the galas. He wanted to build things with his hands. He dropped out of Harvard after 1 semester, a scandal that the family never forgave. He moved to a small town in upstate New York, married a waitress named Elena, my mother, and opened a garage. The Harringtons were mortified. "You're throwing your life away," my grandfather told him, according to the version of the story my father finally told me when I was 16. "You're throwing away this family." "I'm not throwing anything away," my father replied. "I'm building something of my own." "You're building nothing," Arthur Harrington III said, "and you'll die with nothing." The final break came when my mother got pregnant with me. My father, desperate to provide, went to his father one last time. Not for money, he swore, just for a loan, a bridge to get through the first few years. My grandfather's response was a check for $50,000 and a letter. The letter said, in so many words, "Take this and don't come back. You're not a Harrington anymore. You made your choice. Now live with it." My father tore up the check. He never told me that part. He never spoke to his family again. I grew up without knowing the weight of all this. I knew we were poor. I knew my father worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week, and still counted pennies at the end of every month. I knew my mother left when I was 7. She couldn't take the small town, the small life, the small dreams. My father never spoke badly of her. He just worked harder. But he never told me about the Harringtons. Not really. Not until I was 18, standing in our living room with an acceptance letter to MIT in my hand. "Your grandfather," he said, his voice rough. "He went to Harvard. He wanted me to go, wanted me to be like him." I looked at the letter, full scholarship, engineering, the kind of opportunity that kids like me didn't get. "Did you want to be like him?" My father laughed. It was a sad sound. "No, kiddo, I wanted to be like me." "And" was the problem. He put his hand on my shoulder. "You go. You be whatever you want to be. Don't let anyone tell you different." I went. I became an engineer. I built a life. And my father stayed in that small town, running his garage, sending me texts every morning. Make today count. I never met my grandfather. I never met my Uncle William or my Aunt Margaret. They were stories to me, myths, villains in a fairy tale my father had barely survived. And then, 3 weeks ago, everything changed. I was in a meeting when my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was from a law firm I'd never heard of. A woman's voice, professional and cold. This message is for Cole Harrington. Please return this call at your earliest convenience regarding the estate of Arthur Harrington III. My grandfather was dead. I didn't know how to feel. I'd never known him. He was a name, a shadow, a check that had been torn up 25 years ago. But my father had known him. My father had been his son. I called my dad that night. "Did you know?" I asked. "He was sick for a while," my father said quietly. "I heard through people." "Did you go see him?" Silence. Then, "He didn't want to see me, Cole. He made that clear 25 years ago. He was your father. He made his choice, I made mine." We didn't talk about it again. I figured that was the end. Old man dies, family that disowned him stays disowned. End of story. I was wrong. The reading of the will was held at the Harrington estate in Boston, a mansion that looked like it belonged in a museum. My father refused to go. "It's not my world," he said. "It never was." But the law firm insisted. Arthur Harrington III's will specifically named my father and me. So I went alone. The room was all dark wood and oil paintings of men who looked like they'd never smiled in their lives. My Uncle William was there, silver-haired and furious. My Aunt Margaret was there, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes sharp as knives. Their children, my cousins, sat behind them, faces carved from the same cold stone. And then there was me, in a suit I'd bought off the rack, sweating through the collar, the ghost at the feast. The lawyer, a thin man with glasses that kept sliding down his nose, cleared his throat and began to read. The estate was massive, hundreds of millions in assets, properties across 3 continents, stocks, bonds, art collections, a private island in the Bahamas. William was to receive the shipping division. Margaret was to receive the real estate holdings. And then the lawyer paused. "The remaining assets," he said, "including the Harrington family home in Boston, the estate in Newport, the majority stake in Harrington Technologies, and the entirety of the liquid capital held in the family trust, are to be transferred in their entirety to one person." My Uncle William shifted in his seat. My Aunt Margaret's fingers tightened on her purse. "These assets," the lawyer continued, "are bequeathed to the child of Richard Harrington, to Cole Harrington, solely, without condition." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. "What?" William's voice cracked like thunder. He was on his feet, his face purple. "That's impossible. Father he wouldn't." "He was in full possession of his faculties," the lawyer said calmly. "The will was drafted 6 months ago, witnessed by 3 physicians, and notarized by this firm. It is ironclad." Margaret's voice was ice. "Richard abandoned this family. He walked away. He took nothing, gave nothing, and now his son who has never spent a single day in this house, gets everything?" The lawyer pushed up his glasses. "There is a letter from Mr. Harrington to be delivered to Mr. Cole Harrington after the reading." He handed me an envelope, cream-colored paper, heavy. My grandfather's handwriting on the front, shaky but legible. "For Cole." I opened it there, in front of all of them. I could feel their eyes on me, burning holes through the paper. The letter was short. I've memorized every word. "Cole, I never knew you. That is my shame to carry. I spent 25 years pretending my son didn't exist because he chose a life I didn't understand. I told myself he was throwing everything away, but the truth is, I was the one who threw him away. I threw him away like garbage because he wasn't what I wanted him to be. I was a fool, a proud, stubborn, miserable fool. I watched you from a distance, your graduation, your work, the man you became. You are your father's son. You are everything I should have valued, everything I was too blind to see. This money will not make up for the years I stole from you. It will not make up for the father I denied my own son, but it is all I have to give. Take it. Build something with it. Be better than I was. Tell your father I am sorry. I have been sorry for 25 years. I was just too proud to say it. Arthur Harrington III. I folded the letter, put it in my jacket pocket, looked at my uncle, still shaking with rage, looked at my aunt, whose lips were white. Congratulations. I hope you choke on it. I didn't say anything. I drove straight to my father's garage. It was after midnight when I pulled in. The lights were still on. He was under a car like always. I sat down on the creeper next to him and handed him the letter. He read it in silence. His hands, those grease-stained, calloused, beautiful hands, shook as he held the paper. When he finished, he closed his eyes. A single tear ran down his cheek, cutting a clean line through the grime. He was proud, my father said. Proudest man I ever knew. Couldn't say sorry if his life depended on it. He said it, I said. In the end, he said it. My father nodded slowly. He folded the letter carefully, the way you fold something you plan to keep forever, and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Same pocket where he'd tucked that first letter 25 years ago. So what now? He asked. I looked around the garage, the tools he'd saved for years to buy, the floor he'd poured himself, the life he'd built with nothing but his hands and his will. Now, I said, we figure out what to do with all that money, because I'm an engineer, Dad. I build things, and I'm thinking we build something big. He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Peace. They threw my father away like garbage 25 years ago. They thought he was nothing. They thought he'd die with nothing. But here's what they didn't understand. My father never needed their money. He never needed their name. He had something they could never buy, never inherit, never steal. He had me. And in the end, that's what the inheritance was really about. Not revenge, not a last laugh, just an old man finally admitting he was wrong, and a son finally hearing the apology he'd waited 25 years to receive.